Welcome to Dopamine Nation, Finding Balance in the Age of Indulgence by Dr. Anna Lembke, a book that's more than just a fascinating exploration of addiction. It's a survival guide for modern life. We live in an age of overwhelming abundance. With every desire a click or swipe away, we've turned the pursuit of pleasure into a full-time occupation. Whether it's binge-watching shows, endlessly scrolling social media, overeating, or even overworking, we're caught in a cycle of overconsumption that leaves us feeling more dissatisfied than ever. Why does this happen? And more importantly, how can we break free? Dr. Lembke, a psychiatrist and expert on addiction, unpacks the neuroscience behind our compulsive behaviors and offers practical strategies for restoring balance in our lives. Through real-life stories of her patients, some shocking, some painfully relatable, she reveals the delicate dance between pleasure and pain in our brains, and how understanding this balance is the key to living a healthier, more fulfilling life. If you've ever felt like you're stuck chasing highs that never truly satisfy, or you're searching for ways to find meaning beyond life's distractions, this book is for you. So, join me as we dive into Dopamine Nation, a journey that's equal parts scientific, practical, and deeply human. You'll gain insights into why we're wired the way we are and, more importantly, how to take control of that wiring to live a life of purpose, connection, and true joy. Part 1 of Dopamine Nation. The pursuit of pleasure dives into the heart of why we're so drawn to the things that make us feel good and why that very pursuit often leaves us feeling worse in the long run. Anna Lembke begins by painting a vivid picture of just how much the world has changed in terms of accessibility to pleasure. In today's world, nearly everything we desire is just a swipe, click, or tap away. Think about it. Food, entertainment, shopping, gambling, even social connections, anything we want is at our fingertips, offering instant hits of dopamine, the brain's feel-good chemical. But the more we indulge, the harder it becomes to stop, and therein lies the rub. The opening chapter introduces us to Jacob, a Silicon Valley professional whose unassuming exterior hides a lifelong struggle with addiction. From a childhood fascination with self-pleasure to building elaborate masturbation machines, Jacob's story underscores how relentless access to pleasure can evolve into an all-consuming trap. It might sound extreme, but Lembke argues that Jacob is not so different from the rest of us. Whether it's binge-watching a Netflix series, scrolling endlessly on social media, or chain-reading romance novels, as Lembke candidly admits to doing herself, we all have our versions of masturbation machines, activities we turn to for quick dopamine fixes that ultimately leave us feeling hollow. This idea sets the stage for a deeper exploration of why we keep chasing pleasure even when it hurts us. The answer lies in the brain's pleasure-pain balance. Imagine your brain as a scale with pleasure on one side and pain on the other. When you indulge in something enjoyable, say, eating a piece of chocolate or scoring likes on Instagram, the pleasure side tips. But here's the catch. The brain doesn't like to stay unbalanced for long. It works to restore equilibrium by tipping the scale back toward pain, which explains why the more pleasure we seek, the more we're left with a feeling of discomfort or craving afterward. Here's where things get tricky. With repeated exposure to pleasure, the brain adapts, and the balance tilts more and more toward pain over time. This process, known as neuroadaptation, means we need increasingly larger doses of whatever it is we're chasing, be it sugar, shopping, or even work success, to achieve the same high. Over time, we're not just chasing pleasure, we're trying to avoid the pain of withdrawal. This is why addictions, whether to substances or behaviors, can feel like quicksand. The harder you try to escape, the deeper you sink. To make this concept relatable, Lembke shares her own experience with romance novels. It started innocently enough with Twilight, a thrilling mix of love, fantasy, and suspense. But soon, tame love stories weren't enough. She needed more graphic, high-stakes plots to feel the same rush. Eventually, she found herself hiding her Kindle from her family, staying up into the wee hours of the night, and even sneaking reads between patients. Like Jacob's addiction to pornography, her seemingly harmless habit had spiraled into compulsive behavior. Both Jacob and Lembke's stories illustrate how our quest for pleasure can become a slippery slope when unchecked. The second chapter broadens the discussion, highlighting how modern society conditions us to avoid discomfort at all costs. Lembke reflects on the medicalization of pain, where doctors are expected to eliminate even the slightest discomfort with pills and procedures. She notes that this mindset extends far beyond physical pain. We're also trying to escape emotional and psychological discomfort. Whether it's anxiety, boredom, or social awkwardness, there's a pill, app, or distraction to dull the edges. Yet, paradoxically, our relentless pursuit of a pain-free life is making us more anxious, more depressed, and less fulfilled. The chapter is peppered with examples of how this plays out in real life. There's David, a young man who turned to Adderall and Ambien to numb his way through college and work, only to find himself spiraling into addiction. Or Sophie, a Stanford student who was so glued to her devices that she couldn't imagine walking to class without earbuds blasting music or podcasts. When Lembke suggested she try experiencing the world without distractions, Sophie's initial response was telling. Why would I do that? It's boring. Boredom, Lembke explains, is often the precursor to creativity and self-discovery. But in a world that constantly feeds us dopamine hits, we've lost our tolerance for it. The third chapter delves deeper into the neuroscience of the pleasure-pain balance, offering a fascinating look at how dopamine drives our behavior. Dopamine isn't just the pleasure chemical, it's more about the wanting than the liking. It motivates us to seek rewards, but it's not necessarily what makes those rewards satisfying. Studies on rats reveal that dopamine drives them to seek food or sex, but once the dopamine is blocked, the desire vanishes even when the reward is within reach. This same mechanism explains why the things we love most can also enslave us. The brain's reward pathway operates on a what goes up must come down principle. Every high is followed by a low, and the higher the high, the deeper the low. Over time, the scale tips permanently toward pain, leaving us in a state of chronic dissatisfaction. This is why addicts often describe their lives as a constant chase not for pleasure, but for relief from the pain of craving. One of the most compelling takeaways from Part 1 is the idea that we're all susceptible to the cycle of pleasure and pain. You don't need to be addicted to drugs or alcohol to understand how this works. If you've ever felt the nagging urge to check your phone seconds after a notification or experienced the letdown after a big purchase, you've felt the pull of dopamine. The key, Lembke suggests, is to recognize the balance and resist the urge to keep tipping it toward pleasure. Through engaging stories, relatable analogies, and clear scientific explanations, Part 1 of Dopamine Nation sets the foundation for understanding why so many of us feel stuck in cycles of compulsive overconsumption. It's not just a personal problem, it's a societal one. But by becoming more aware of how our brains work, we can start to take back control and find a healthier balance between pleasure and pain. The journey, as Lembke assures us, is well worth it. Part 2 of Dopamine Nation. Self-binding shifts from understanding the problem of compulsive overconsumption to exploring solutions. Anna Lembke offers an intriguing idea. Sometimes, the best way to avoid temptation is not through sheer willpower but by placing strategic limits on ourselves. This section introduces the concept of self-binding, a proactive strategy for managing cravings and resetting the brain's pleasure-pain balance. It's not about deprivation. It's about creating space for genuine satisfaction and long-term well-being. The first chapter, Dopamine Fasting, introduces self-binding as a tool to regain control over compulsive behaviors. Imagine you're sitting at a buffet with endless options of your favorite foods. At first, it's exciting, you want to try everything. But as you pile your plate higher, each bite becomes less enjoyable, until you're left bloated and miserable. That's what modern life feels like. We're gorging on endless streams of pleasure scrolling, shopping, snacking, but instead of feeling satisfied, we're increasingly overwhelmed and unhappy. Lembke explains that the antidote to this overload is to create intentional limits. She draws on the idea of dopamine fasting, a trendy concept that's often misunderstood. It's not about cutting out all pleasure indefinitely. It's about taking a break from activities that overstimulate your brain. This might mean a day without social media, a week without sugar, or simply leaving your phone in another room while you sleep. By giving your brain a chance to recalibrate, you restore the balance between pleasure and pain, making life's small joys feel meaningful again. To illustrate this, Lembke shares the story of Ian, a college student addicted to video games. Ian was spending 12 hours a day gaming, neglecting school and social relationships. With Lembke's guidance, he agreed to stop gaming for 30 days. The first week was brutal. He felt restless, irritable, and bored. But by week 2, he noticed a surprising change. He started enjoying simple activities he hadn't appreciated before, like going for walks or cooking meals. By the end of the month, Ian wasn't just gaming less. He was rediscovering himself. Lembke's point is clear. Stepping away from compulsive behaviors isn't just about quitting. It's about making room for something better. The second chapter, Space, Time, and Meaning, expands on the idea of self-binding by emphasizing the importance of boundaries. Lembke argues that modern life erodes these boundaries, leaving us constantly overstimulated. Think about how technology has blurred the lines between work and home, rest and productivity. When every space and moment can be filled with distraction, it's harder to carve out time for deeper, more meaningful experiences. One way to combat this is to set clear physical and mental limits. Lembke uses the example of her patient, Zoe, a young woman struggling with compulsive shopping. Zoe would spend hours scrolling through online stores, maxing out credit cards and filling her home with items she didn't need. Together, they came up with practical boundaries. Zoe deleted shopping apps from her phone, set a strict monthly spending limit, and even froze her credit cards in a block of ice, literally creating a barrier to impulsive purchases. These small changes had a profound impact, not just on her finances but on her mental health. Without constant access to the temptation of shopping, Zoe found she had more time and energy for hobbies and relationships. Lembke also highlights the role of meaning in overcoming compulsive behaviors. She explains that while self-binding can help curb bad habits, it's equally important to fill that freed-up space with activities that align with your values and purpose. For one patient, that meant reconnecting with their family after years of addiction. For another, it meant taking up woodworking as a way to channel their energy. The key takeaway is that boundaries alone aren't enough. You need something worth striving for on the other side. The final chapter of Part 2, A Broken Balance, delves into the deeper challenges of maintaining equilibrium in today's world. Lembke acknowledges that self-binding isn't always easy, especially when the environment around us is designed to undermine it. From algorithms that lure us into endless scrolling to hyperpalatable foods engineered for addiction, modern life constantly tips the balance toward overindulgence. She argues that recognizing this isn't an excuse to give up but a call to action. If we want to live balanced, meaningful lives, we need to take intentional steps to counteract these forces. One of the most relatable examples comes from Lembke's own life. She shares how, despite knowing the science behind dopamine and addiction, she found herself glued to her phone during the early days of the pandemic. She would spend hours checking news updates, scrolling social media, and texting friends. It wasn't until her teenage daughter called her out, "Mom, you're always on your phone," that she realized how far she'd strayed from her own advice. Taking her daughter's words to heart, Lembke set firm limits on her phone use, such as no screens during family meals and a digital sunset an hour before bed. These changes didn't just improve her mental health, they also strengthened her relationship with her family. The overarching lesson from Part 2 is that freedom doesn't come from unlimited access to pleasure. It comes from setting boundaries that allow us to live in harmony with our values. Self-binding isn't about deprivation, it's about creating the conditions for true satisfaction. By limiting our access to distractions and indulgences, we give ourselves the chance to experience life more fully, connect with others more deeply, and find joy in the simple things we often overlook. It's not easy, but as Lembke assures us, it's worth it. Part 3 of Dopamine Nation. The pursuit of pain takes an unexpected turn, exploring how leaning into discomfort, not running from it, can help us restore balance and find a deeper sense of well-being. It's a bold idea in a world that constantly encourages us to seek pleasure and avoid pain. But as Anna Lembke explains, pain isn't the enemy. It's part of the solution. The section begins with pressing on the pain side, where Lembke introduces the concept of hormesis, the idea that a little bit of stress or pain can actually make us stronger. Think about the way exercise works. When you lift weights, you're essentially tearing your muscles. It's uncomfortable, even painful, but that stress signals your body to rebuild stronger muscles. The same principle applies to other kinds of discomfort. By voluntarily exposing ourselves to controlled doses of pain, whether it's through physical challenges, emotional vulnerability, or discipline, we can reset the brain's pleasure-pain balance and build resilience. One of the most compelling stories in this chapter is about Logan, a middle-aged man who struggled with chronic pain and opioid addiction. Logan's story takes a surprising turn when he discovers the power of ice baths. At first, plunging into freezing water was excruciating, but over time, Logan found that enduring this self-imposed discomfort not only helped him manage his cravings, but also gave him a sense of accomplishment and control. Lembke uses Logan's experience to highlight a key takeaway. Choosing discomfort intentionally can help us avoid the kind of unintentional pain that comes from overindulgence. In Radical Honesty, Lembke shifts from physical discomfort to emotional pain, showing how confronting difficult truths can be a transformative act. She argues that addiction thrives in secrecy. The lies we tell ourselves and others to hide our compulsions create a vicious cycle of shame and isolation. The antidote, she says, is radical honesty, laying our truths bare, no matter how uncomfortable they might be. One patient, a successful lawyer named Sarah, exemplifies this. Sarah had spent years hiding her drinking problem, presenting a polished image to the world while spiraling behind closed doors. When she finally admitted the truth to her family and colleagues, it was terrifying and painful. But that honesty became the foundation of her recovery. By breaking free from the lies that kept her stuck, Sarah found not only sobriety but also a deeper sense of connection with the people around her. Lembke emphasizes that while honesty can be painful in the short term, it ultimately brings freedom and healing. The chapter also explores the role of honesty in our broader culture. Lembke critiques how social media perpetuates curated versions of reality, encouraging us to present only the most polished, enviable aspects of our lives. She argues that this constant comparison to others' highlight reels fuels dissatisfaction and compulsive behaviors. Radical honesty isn't just about admitting our struggles. It's about rejecting the false narratives we project and consume every day. The final chapter, Prosocial Shame, tackles a controversial topic: the potential benefits of shame. In modern culture, shame is often seen as wholly negative, something to be avoided at all costs. But Lembke argues that not all shame is created equal. While toxic shame, an internalized sense of worthlessness, is destructive, prosocial shame can be a powerful motivator for change. Prosocial shame is the kind we feel when our actions fall short of our values or harm others. It's uncomfortable, but it can also inspire accountability and growth. Lembke illustrates this with the story of Jack, a college student whose addiction to video games led him to neglect his relationships and responsibilities. Jack hit rock bottom when his girlfriend left him, and his parents stopped supporting him financially. The shame of losing their trust forced Jack to confront his behavior. With time, he used that shame as a catalyst to rebuild his life, repair his relationships, and set healthier boundaries with gaming. Lembke argues that when shame is paired with compassion from ourselves or others, it becomes a tool for self-reflection and growth rather than a prison of self-loathing. What makes Part 3 so powerful is its insistence on reframing pain as an opportunity rather than a threat. Lembke doesn't sugarcoat the difficulty of this approach. Facing discomfort head-on is hard. Admitting painful truths is hard. Allowing ourselves to feel the sting of shame is hard. But, as she explains, avoiding pain doesn't make it disappear, it just defers it. By leaning into discomfort, we can build the resilience to handle life's challenges without falling into the trap of compulsive overconsumption. The overarching message of Part 3 is that pain, when approached intentionally and with the right mindset, is not something to fear. It's a natural and necessary part of life, and it holds the key to breaking free from the cycles of addiction and dissatisfaction that so many of us struggle with. Whether it's through physical challenges, emotional honesty, or confronting our shortcomings, choosing pain in small, deliberate doses allows us to rediscover joy and balance. In wrapping up this section, Lembke invites us to rethink our relationship with discomfort. It's not about becoming masochists or rejecting pleasure altogether. It's about recognizing that pleasure and pain are two sides of the same coin, and that true happiness comes from finding a balance between the two. By embracing discomfort, we create space for authentic joy, deeper connections, and a life that's not just about chasing the next dopamine hit, but about living in harmony with ourselves and the world around us. As we reach the end of Dopamine Nation, Finding Balance in the Age of Indulgence, Dr. Anna Lembke leaves us with a powerful and hopeful message. The secret to happiness isn't in avoiding pain or chasing endless pleasure. It's in understanding the balance between the two and learning to live in harmony with our brain's natural rhythms. By embracing discomfort, setting intentional limits, and cultivating honesty and connection, we can escape the traps of overconsumption and rediscover the joy in life's simplest moments. This book reminds us that we're all navigating a world designed to overstimulate and overwhelm us, but we have the power to push back. Whether it's taking breaks from dopamine-fueled habits, facing our truths with courage, or finding meaning in small but significant actions, the path to balance is within reach for everyone. I encourage you to take the lessons from this book and reflect on your own life. Where are you tipping too far toward pleasure at the expense of balance? What small steps can you take today to restore that equilibrium? And most importantly, how can you embrace discomfort as an ally in your journey toward a more fulfilling life? Thank you for joining me on this exploration of Dopamine Nation. If you found these ideas valuable, consider sharing them with others, starting conversations, and, most importantly, applying them in your own life. After all, the first step to finding balance is simply becoming aware of the scales. Let's tip them toward a life worth living.